This is a video about why the world is becoming apocalyptic and how it's going to affect you. Because the way the modern world is working, everything is predicated on the dollar. Now, back in the day, that was okay. In the 70s, 80s, you could work a job 2-3 days a week and manage. You might work 5 days a week and manage. But the way the economic situation is currently working it out as, that's impossible. And it's going to be even more and more infeasible, to the point where you might find yourself working 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. And you're like, how? We have AI coming out. We have all this new innovation and technology that's going to replace all this hard work and effort that we're going to do. Oh yeah? And what happens when the exact systems that create that AI cause massive economic turmoil and massive environmental turmoil? Because these AI systems, they use the environment and cause pollution. How do you respond to then? And who's going to protect you when at the end of the day, the same systems that the society created to save you from work now prevent you from making enough money to go live in gentrified areas? These are just some of the problems that I'm going to be getting into in today's video. So subscribe to that channel and hit that like button, because I hope to make more of this content for you guys. Some of my thought processes and things I speak with certain individuals who, unfortunately in this day and age, are too uncommon. The other day I was sitting behind my house and I was talking to my neighbor Lee, and he told me about how back in the 70s, he used to rent out a place for $200. He would work 3 days a week chopping some stumps, and he could live very well off of that. He could also afford time to reflect and think, and that's one of the most crucial elements that any of us can really have: the ability to think critically about ourselves, the ability to navigate our lives, to plot out where we're headed. And unfortunately, due to the economic strain that we currently live in, the form of capitalism that we've been inundated with, we've lost touch with ourselves. We've lost touch with the ability to really know who we are and what we want out of our lives. When you take a group of children and you put them in front of a TV, and every 5 minutes, commercial comes off with silly rabbit, tricks are for kids, or brand new Nintendo Spider-Man game, so they can start hopping on the walls and everything like that. And they get used to this system of commodification. You do something, you earn the money, you go and pay. And it's a repetitive cycle. Money then becomes devalued. It loses its essential quality. Because what is the essential quality of money? The essential quality of money is, I have a need, right? I do some work, I get the money, I'm able to use that money to get my need. But what happens when the necessities of people are no longer based on their own needs, but they're based on identity gaps? In other words, I buy a really fancy sports car, the new Acura, the BMW, the Mercedes-Benz, right? Or what happens when I need to get that fancy house to get out of my home or my community, or I need to move to a certain place because my place is becoming gentrified and it affects me negatively, right? And because of the commodification of everything in this world, we now live in an environment where you either A, can't afford it, so you have to hop ship and go somewhere else, or B, you can afford it and you choose to because you're not critical enough to really understand what's going on beneath the surface. And so you feed the machine. And what is the machine? The machine is the life that you were raised in and taught to believe was the correct way of living from a very early age. It's the same machine that encapsulates the education system in America and other places abroad, many other places abroad if you're human, and it's the same one that really churns out people as if they're robots. And so, getting back to the AI analogy, it's not a far stretch to see where AI plays in all of this because of the robotic nature of it, because of how AI is meant to replicate human communication. And I would say that it does so very well, except it will never have the fundamental capacity that humans have to get in touch with their soul, to get in touch with that emotional reasoning that is able to generate and create new ideas. And that is part of the discussion that's often left out in these AI discussions and all this talk about AI, is that sure, AI can be a tool in a toolkit, but it can never generate a genuine thought. It can analyze based on previous data, but it cannot create a solution, right? It cannot create a religion. It cannot create a form of meditation. It can give suggestions based on previous analysis, but it can't spark something out of nothing. And this gets back to a philosophical debate about whether or not something creates something, or it's possible for something to be created in a vacuum. And I think that it is possible to create something in a vacuum, because if you are a creative person, you take what the world gives you, you interpret it, and then you spit it back out, right? But it's never based on the sole elements of that which inspired you. There's an element of you in there. And that you in you is something that can't be replaced. And it doesn't fit in an economy that commodifies human beings into numbers, into a number on a job application, into a cover letter, into a resume. You have no place in that market. All that has place in that market is for your skill set. And that's really what it looks like. You get down and you're reduced to the lowest common denominator of a resume. They take the resume and they see this is you, right? But they don't see the other side of you. And in some ways, because of the way the economy is set up, because of the corporatization of the world, that becomes the fundamental basis on which you deal with other human beings. So everything becomes very shallow. Relationships become very shallow. You wave at your neighbor. You might not even know your neighbor in most cases if you live in this country. You go to dinner with your family. You might not even go to dinner with your family. If you're at dinner with your family, this person's on Twitter, that person's on Reddit, that person's on YouTube, speaking with other people, and all of a sudden you have this humongous existential void. And how do you fill the existential void? How do you fill the deep drive and desire within you to connect to another human being? Drugs, or video games, or social media consumption. The list goes on and on and on. Or maybe you just hang out with people you don't even resonate with. Because this is the bottom line. The way the economy is set up, the increasing financial strain, and all the stressors involved in that, and all the escape mechanisms that we have in a capitalist culture, in this particular capitalist culture, the only options that you really have are existential dread, fleeing, finding coping mechanism to deal with the fact that your personhood has been robbed, right? And now if you're on the if you start to realize this and you're like, you know what? I have a self. I embody myself. I want myself to be as strong as possible. I want to have an identity. I want to know who I am. How are you going to do that? How are you going to do that when your work shift, right? Like the hours that you go to work at are 9 to 5 now, and in the foreseeable future, like a 9 to 9. That's going to be a tough sell. It's going to be a tough position to really love yourself when all your behaviors are for other people. Because that's what a job is. It's an externally oriented thing, with the exception of some jobs, mainly creative. And so if all your time is spent consumed in the external world, you have no time to reflect from yourself. And what could be more robotic than you being trapped in a position where you can't think for yourself? And this is part of the apocalypse, right? The apocalypse is the loss of self, is the loss of core, the loss of value, right? The loss of really being in tune with your body, mind, soul. And as a consequence of that, you see the consequences in the environment, right? Because as we start to lose touch with ourselves, we start to lose touch with nature. And as we start to lose touch with nature, goodbye trees, more roads, more buildings. All of a sudden, we're living in gated communities, trapped like little mice. And that's exactly where the people in power want us. That's exactly where society wants us, to be a part of that collective scheme. That's a tough environment to live in, especially because as human beings, we're like spiritual baboons. And nature is a part of us, like the trees, or like what we swing on, right? And once you eliminate that, you're really eliminating a part of yourself. And is it really so difficult for us to understand why we would be dealing with environmental catastrophes in 2025 and beyond, given the fact that we've lost touch with ourselves? Given the fact that now it's abnormal to sit and have a dinner with your family? That's an interesting question, and it adds more questions, as in, what's the situation going to be like in 10, 15, 20, 30 years, right? You might not worry about this now, but if you don't start thinking about it, pretty soon you're going to become just like everyone else, a part of that collective laboratory of mice. So you have the environmental strain. You have the external orientation at your job, where all your behaviorisms and your speech patterns and your thought are based on external validation, because that's how you get the job. That's how you impress your coworkers. That's how you exist. And then you add on to that the financial strain, because things are only going up. So now you're like, oh, I need to take on more jobs. I need to spend more money. And now you're really in a pinch, right? Because you don't have the time to work on yourself or your family, your kids, or if you're young, you just want a honey. You just want a girlfriend, right? But you don't even have time to work on the relationship to even go out and spend the dinner, because you're either too busy at work, or when you're spending the dinner, the suppressed feelings from all that come out, because you can only hold back. It's like a fizzled sparkling water. You can only hold it back for so long until you open up the cap, and then it comes out. And I'll tell you who it typically comes out on: family members. They're going to be the first ones to pick up on this, on the internal stress and fatigue. So you got the environmental, right? You got the external validation, and you have the stress. And now all of a sudden your options are limited. It's like you're wearing one of those, what are they? You're strapped up, right? And you can't break free. Well, at that point, what can you do, right? How can you express yourself? What tools, what utilities do you have, right? You're gonna go pick up a guitar when you're exhausted from your job? Maybe you'll just talk to AI and have a conversation with AI because you're lonely. And that is getting back to this conversation that I had with Lee, because, and there goes this kid on his fancy new, kind of like a moped. Here's the thing. There's tons of kids over here. They drive these very fancy new mopeds, and it's so synchronistic with this conversation, right? Because they're not doing it for fun. They do it for an hour. I could imagine it maybe being fun for the first 5 minutes. But if you're just going on back and forth on the same street for an hour, I think you're killing time. And this is why I said it comes back to a very early age, because back in high school, I remember the video game consumption. I remember the social media consumption. I remember escapist like tools. And we are in some ways a neurotic society trying to escape the very real threats that are imposed on us. It's a difficult situation because it seems like there's no outlet. Job opportunities get less and less. There's more competition. That competition is replicated in the reality. Now you're competing with your next door neighbor for a position that's twice as low as the salary you initially wanted, right? And where you're going to see yourself in a few years is even going to be different from where you see yourself now, economically and in terms of your mental health, right? And you see it all across the world, and I think the Earth is a great metaphor for this, because just as these environmental catastrophes happen on Earth, you think of the earthquakes, you think of like Tijuana and how that reaches into California and ruins the water and pollutes the water over there. This is a migration of people and a polluting psychotic state that begins to infest everything. And it's not far from there to where people don't believe they have souls. And once you embody that, once your being is really like, I don't have a soul and my only purpose is just to press a button to earn my living, well, you're right where the society and the peoples in power want you. Because now you're very easy to manipulate and be used. And your sense of self, completely gone, erased. And that is why we are headed to an apocalyptic world.